Hello YouTube, this is Morgan Airspeed Prime here with my next Star Wars video. This is going to be my review for The Bad Batch Season 3, Episodes 1 to 9. So covering 9 episodes in one episode. So straight away to explain why I haven't been reviewing the episodes weekly like I usually would. Just lots of time needed on the channel to be spent covering Netflix Avatar, which finally the coverage on that is coming to an end, so I can get back to, having a little bit more of an open kind of video schedule here. So yeah, I'm just going to do a kind of recap review here for the first 9, and then I'll get back to covering the remaining episodes weekly as they release. So obviously we have actually 2 episodes coming next week. Episode 10 and 11, and then we are weekly up to the finale, episode 15, on May 1st. So seems like it's actually a decent timing to get back into things, where the first 9 episodes seem to sort of be a little bit of here's the calm-ish before the storm that is likely to be the remaining 6 episodes of not just the season but the series, because this is the final season of The Bad Batch. So we're expecting some major things to happen in the remaining 6 episodes. But yeah, let's get into talking about season 3 so far. So overall, I think it's definitely been the best season of The Bad Batch so far. It still has elements of, I think, the issues that season 1 and 2 suffered from, in terms of if what feels like relatively small mysteries being stretched out across maybe too long. The sense that definitely a few episodes feel like they need to have that big 7-minute action sequence of the Bad Batch fighting against some sort of a monster. That tends to happen quite a bit. But I think we have avoided the problems from previous seasons, where we have had pretty obvious and I think clear-cut kind of filler episodes. We have elements of that here with certain episodes, like maybe episode 2 perhaps, elements of episode 4, 8, feel like episodes that in previous seasons would have just been Riot Racing 2.0 or something like that. But here they keep all of the episodes interesting by just doing a little bit more with the characters. Of episode 2 works because Hunter and Wrecker are desperate trying to find information on Omega. And I'm glad that they kind of summed up that kind of feeling in just one episode, rather than you would think maybe in previous seasons they would have felt the need to do multiple episodes of Hunter and Wrecker doing multiple missions to find Omega. But instead, the focus is actually, no, let's actually develop Omega and Crosshairs and have them escape, and that be how the plot actually plays out. So that's pretty fine. And it means that probably the weakest episode of the season, probably for me, is episode 8, which is the Fennec Shand episode, just because you're using another cameo character to basically set up the introduction of a more important cameo character, and it felt like, okay, here's just a mission to just make the next thing happen. And I think we could have solved this by potentially having Fennec and Asajj more or less be in the same episode, because I didn't feel like we learned a lot about Fennec in the Fennec episode. So because of that, it kind of was just the group being the group. You had the nice Omega kind of Crosshair stuff with the meditation, but it definitely didn't feel the strongest overall. Potentially just a little bit of, okay, they're stringing the mysteries along. We've got 6 episodes left to just kind of execute on the plot of the show, but also to reveal a lot of answers. And the question is obviously going to be, do you have answers to these questions? Especially when effectively, it's Project Necromancer, it's M Count, it's effectively Palpatine clones. Given that we know that this kind of still continues on into Mandalorian era and so on, and that we know in the sequels what it eventually leads up to, there's a lot of question about can you actually reveal significant details about this now, or does this have to be done in a way where what we maybe have so far is the best of it and we can't really do anything more? It'd be interesting to see what happens. But otherwise, I think the season's been really good. I think they've been doing a lot more with the characters, because they did some very dramatic stuff in last season, separating a lot of the characters in terms of Omega being captured, but she's basically captured in the place where Crosshairs is, it allows for that relationship to develop. And then because you actually reunite Crosshairs and Omega with the group pretty early on, it means that reunion stuff is great because you get the kind of standard character drama that you'd expect of, will he be trusted back with the group? But then they never forget to do the other stuff that's going on in this series, and that it's called The Bad Batch, but effectively it is the Clone Wars that is just clone focused without really Jedi focused. That's kind of what we're doing here. So the finale that we're building up to has to be, of course, the finale for The Bad Batch, but it also kind of needs to be, in a way, a finale for the clones as well. Because I think we're all expecting some sort of a giant battle between clones and stormtroopers, and maybe clones who are loyal to the Empire are in there as well. And we're expecting some big moves to happen here in terms of really shifting things effectively away from stuff that still obviously feels like it's Clone Wars era to truly being like we're full on in the Empire era, even though basically this whole show has kind of been basically the Empire era, just real that shift away that, you know, the Empire isn't using clones anymore at the end is kind of what we're expecting. So yeah, I'm just going to try and run through the episodes here, point out the really interesting stuff that stood out to me. So we actually get a 3-episode premiere here with Confined, Paths Unknown, and Shadows of Tantis. Obviously, it's a bit of a weird one where like 1 and 3 are basically like part 1 and part 2, and then 2 is just kind of going over to check on what Wrecker and Hunter are doing. Focusing on episode 2 first, I liked the kind of the dedication, in a way, the desperation from Hunter and Wrecker, just trying to do anything they can to get information, but it being this struggle. But like even the kind of criminals effectively that they're dealing with can kind of see that desperation in them of what they're trying to do. They're doing missions where they just want information as payment. That's pretty interesting to me. But what I think made this episode kind of more than just, okay, it's Hunter and Wrecker doing a mission, was definitely that we had some younger clones be a part of this episode. They find them on the planet, and while still it's kind of a bit of a monster attack thing with the kind of slither vines and so on, I did really like the kind of the younger clones not knowing who to trust, but then growing to really trust the Bad Batch, and then by the end of the episode, the Bad Batch kind of placing the younger clones on Pabu and being like, you now have an opportunity to decide your own path. You don't have to be soldiers. You're young enough to where you can do whatever you want going forward. Now, will we focus on what those characters are doing? I'm not sure. But it made that episode better than I think what an equivalent episode would have been in previous seasons. But then, episode 1 and 3, the kind of Tantis escape arc here. I really like this. They gave a lot of time to this to focus on how Omega's feeling being imprisoned, how Crosshairs is feeling being imprisoned, her trying to connect with him, but then, of course, the setup that, you know, we need to escape at some point. And the thing that causes a lot of this to happen being, now let's say, protecting Omega from having her blood samples actually be studied. But Emery actually takes a blood sample and goes to test it, and this is what triggers the fact that, okay, you need to go. Because the second that blood sample comes through, I know what it means, and then eventually we find out what it means, which is, of course, the big reveal from the first 3 episodes, and that is that Omega is a major success in Project Necromancer because her blood basically held the M count that was like injected into it. That it's basically the M count transfusion or whatever didn't diminish from the original source of the M count being put into Omega. So that's huge. And obviously it's the success of whatever Hemlock is actually trying to do. So they need Omega alive, but at this point, of course, she has escaped. So they can't crash the ship because what if they kill Omega? They've ruined the thing that is actually going to make the plan happen. Because, interestingly, in episode 3, Palpatine actually visits Tantis to check on the project, and you can tell how in a way desperate Palpatine is. Like, this is the most important thing for the future of the Empire. You will get everything that you need, Dr. Hemlock, and he wants that kind of success, and that success is Omega. So great stuff here with Nala Se kind of being a kind of mother figure to Omega. That's pretty strong. Even the little bit of kind of sympathy that we got to eventually see with Emery, of her giving Omega the toy back, but still, you know, ultimately being on the Empire side of things. I'm kind of wondering, is anything going to happen with Emery as we, I guess, come back to Tantis eventually? Other parts here, we did get the animal character, the Batcher, who Omega helps, and then she has for kind of the rest of the season. There's maybe a little bit of like especially in the more recent episode with Ventress, the idea of, oh, Omega connected very strongly, quickly with an animal. Is that a hint of force, or is it just that she was kind and the animal kind of responded to that? It's a bit of an interesting kind of discussion, given where things actually go. Otherwise, the Crosshair stuff is kind of interesting because he's very much kind of like, you know, it's a hopeless situation. You know, why are you coming to me? I betrayed you guys. But she still has kind of faith in him from like last season. And we really see that when it comes to like, okay, we're doing the escape, he does go along with her. And it's this idea of where we go with Crosshairs is effectively turning him into another kind of like dad character to Omega. And you especially see that when the Bad Batch fully reunites, is that is one of the key points of why like Wrecker and Hunter especially grow to trust him again, is because they can see that Omega trusts Crosshairs and they trust her. So that's why they then go to, you know, trust Crosshairs, because they can see there's a connection there that in a way they don't even have. Like their time in prison together, they formed a bit of a bond that's different and unique compared to the others. And you can see that in as you go through the episodes of like Omega having little Crosshairs kind of behaviors that like he does, and they're like, "Ooh, this is weird." She's taking after him, like with the toothpick thing in his mouth, and she does it as well. That was kind of fun, of course. But yeah, the escape from Tantis, of course, works. Yeah, the M count reveal is significant. I'll get more in depth on the whole midichlorian stuff when we get to talking about episode 9, because that's when it properly like comes out. Because they do make M count to be a mystery over the whole season. No one knows what this means until Ventress comes in and tells them what it is. So there's that. Episode 4 was basically they devote an episode to Omega and Crosshairs making their like escape and then getting to Hunter and Wrecker. This was mainly fun to just see the idea of Omega knows some of what to do from traveling with Hunter and Wrecker. Crosshairs isn't like particularly involved, but of course has to help with the keeping them safe. A little bit too much focus perhaps here on just getting money and encountering people who ask for specific amounts of money, and it perfectly adds up. And it's like, okay, I get what you're doing here, but they get to the right point. And again, it's that idea of what in previous seasons might have felt a little bit fillery, has enough here to justify its like inclusion and a whole episode being devoted to it, because it helps develop Omega and Crosshairs more. But finally we get the reunion here of everyone, and as expected, it's the mix of they're so happy to see Omega, but there's immediate tension with Crosshairs because of the betrayal. But as they go through the idea of kind of working together here to attack this kind of worm thing, they do grow to trust him. And over the coming episodes, you see that Hunter goes from being quite cautious and kind of not wanting Omega to be around Crosshairs on his own, to all of a sudden he's defending Crosshair in front of the other clones that they meet up with who don't like Crosshair. And that's a big thing, again, because I think they can see that he cares about Omega in the same way that they do, and she trusts him completely, and that's a key part of the group. That's definitely what they're doing well with regards to the kind of Bad Batch characterization, is just that it is that kind of family unit style dynamic of they all really care for Omega, and she trusts them completely. But yeah, so that's an important episode. Just the return of the Bad Batch episode, kind of episode 5. Echo's also in this one. Echo, you could tell they're not really sure what to do. Where like he's part of the Bad Batch, but also he's part of Rex's group, and he's just constantly kind of jumping back and forth between the groups. I do feel he ultimately still feels like more of the member of the Rex kind of group rather than fully the Bad Batch, just because they haven't managed to kind of use him as much as kind of is required. But then this gets into the kind of reintroduction of Rex and a lot of the other clones and everything going on there. This also introduces us to the kind of clone assassin plot point, which we did get introduced to last season, but we hadn't come back to it in a while. So one of the assassins gets captured, but then a new one gets introduced to basically take out the first assassin. And so there is a bit of a mystery surrounding who this other assassin is. Have they been super clear about like setting up that like this is a mystery, there's a secret identity under here? Or is it just a random clone? I'm not really sure. But because they're kind of teasing the idea of like Crosshair was in this kind of plan to make assassin clones, but they couldn't do it to him. It to me opens the door to the obvious suggestions for who the assassin is. If it is a mystery identity character, is Cody or Tech. I'm pretty convinced Tech isn't dead, just because they have not done due diligence enough to fully clarify that he actually did die. I think everything about the way they did it at the end of last season, and even to a certain degree how it hasn't been brought up as much as you'd maybe think. Like Tech gets mentioned every so often. It doesn't feel like it's super final. So I do feel, just for bringing everything to its conclusion, you need to bring Tech back into things and bring things to their conclusion. I do think Tech makes a bit more sense just from a character point of view to be the assassin than Cody, mainly because that reveal then allows the group to have this fight against their friend who they thought was dead, who's now been brainwashed to be an Empire loyal assassin. And especially Crosshair's having to fight against a brainwashed Tech is a really interesting dynamic, because Crosshairs is the one who's betraying everyone, but now he potentially has to be key to getting Tech back on side. That just feels like the perfect style of kind of character arc style moment that they want to do for both characters, basically. The team seeing Crosshairs bring the last member of the group back in. Otherwise, I don't know. It does feel like if they do just keep Tech dead, I guess it's fine. But it's always just that thing of, unless we see for absolute certainty that he's dead, we just never believe it in Star Wars these days. Cody is the other character just because he is the most significant kind of high-profile clone that we know about, who's not really been in the series so far in the season. And it feels like we're not going to potentially finalize and resolve all of this stuff with the clones unless Cody is involved here to a certain degree. Now, the thing with Cody is that his connection is more to like Rex and those other clones than the Bad Batch. So it does feel like if we're maybe going to do that reveal, Rex probably needs to be there, because Rex and Cody is kind of like the big dynamic, rather than, if the Bad Batch is the one to kind of get Cody back on side, does that mean anything? And then there's always the potential of they just use Cody for very different reasons. I feel like they should, if it is him, turn him back and have him be on the crew going into the kind of finale, if Rex and everyone else is going to be there as well. But I kind of wonder, like, is Cody maybe going to be killed at some point over the course of the season? Because one thing we know is, of course, Rex, Gregor, and Wolf make it to Rebels, because that's the trio of clones that we see. But where's Cody in all of this? I forget if there is material that tells us about Cody surviving further into the franchise, because again, I'm not familiar with a lot of the comics that have come out, so I'm not sure about that. But at least in my head, I kind of get the sense like Cody's a bit of a mystery in terms of where exactly he is going forward. And as the Obi-Wan clone commander, I think there's significance on him as well. So I do feel just because they have that clone assassin survive the fall down the waterfall, it they're placing the idea of this character's going to come back and some sort of a reveal comes out. Another part of it is just that the next episode, episode 10, is called Identity Crisis, and I kind of feel like, well, is this where we're going to do this? It kind of makes a bit of sense. Like, do a lot of your character reintroduction stuff early on, so everyone is there for like the finale, like 4 or 5 episodes or whatever way you're going to do it. So there's that. Yeah, episode 7 has the reintroduction of Wolf, which I thought was important, just to set up the rebels kind of trio of clones that, you know, Rex and Gregor are right here. What about Wolf? Here he is. He's still loyal to the Empire, but we do enough character work in this episode to make Wolf basically order a retreat rather than like, we're going in, we're capturing you. So it's just waiting for like the reintroduction of Wolf and when they're going to do the, I suppose, proper turn here. A lot depends on what the setup to some sort of a big climactic battle actually is, and where everyone is kind of located. The logistics of the situation is going to be important. Then we get into the more recent episode. So obviously episode 8 is the Fennec Shand episode, like I said earlier on. The setup here is mostly about the whole, like, the Empire is hiring bounty hunters to capture people with high M count, basically. With the idea, in my opinion, I guess, being that this is where they get the M count blood to inject into the clones as part of the testing. I guess most of what this is about. But of course they want to know about this, so they go to Fennec Shand because they had a run-in with her before. And most of this episode is just that Fennec Shand is like, I will help you if you help me on my bounty. And it's just a kind of side mission type thing because the payment is just Fennec contacting Ventress, who comes into play in the next episode. It's just one of those ones where Fennec is fun and all, but this was not really a character episode as such, like, for her. Whereas this, like I said, felt like the more fillery episode, and you could have, I think, quite easily, merged this with episode 9 and just had Fennec maybe be there really early on and transition immediately into Ventress. But, you know, they wanted to have an episode here. It was kind of fun going through the swamp and stuff like that, but it kind of mostly was a bit of a fight against someone. But at least on the other side of the episode, you did have the kind of Crosshair meditating with Omega plot point, because he's got the shaky hand kind of arc of, like, psychologically, a little bit physically, he is struggling with everything that's happened to him, in terms of injuries, but also just what he's been through at the hands of the Empire and all the betrayals that he has done. He has this kind of PTSD type thing, and when it comes to fighting, his accuracy is way off, and he's the sniper character. That's his special skill. So Omega is the one kind of helping him through this, and it seems like it's slowly getting there, that this meditation does kind of help, and that, you know, he was able to sort of get the advantage over the clone assassin in, like, the previous episode. So I'm wondering how far this is actually going, and are we going with the idea of, like, this is going to help get him roughly back to this case, or are we going to get a full recovery for Crosshairs? And this is where you maybe wonder if maybe that assassin's identity does get revealed to be Tech, and we maybe get the reunion of the full Bad Batch. Is that going to be the thing that maybe gets his sniping back on kind of full power? That would be an interesting one. But that brings us into the most recent episode, episode 9, the Asajj Ventress episode. So a lot of things to talk about with this one. Because while overall you would say the episode itself is probably not maybe the overall most interesting episode, just because it is mainly like a fight scene with the Bad Batch and Ventress, but she's testing Omega, and the tests are they're not the most obvious ones. There's still definitely the sense of a lot of vagueness about the way we're talking about M count, force sensitivity, what's going on here, but certainly a calm before the storm style episode where the big thing at the end is Ventress warning them about, like, the Empire is much worse than you think, and you're going to have to make some decisions coming up, because if what I kind of believe is the case with Omega, they're coming for you, and you need to be prepared for that. That you're not going to be able to just hide her, kind of like it's going to happen here. That's the real question. So straight away, there's some big things with this episode. So one, if you read the novel Dark Disciple, your immediate question is like, how is Ventress alive? They killed her off in that book, and this is obviously set after that, so she should be dead here. What's going on? It doesn't get explained here how she is alive, but if you do go back and kind of look at the details of her death and like final scenes basically in that book, it leaves the door open. And they have said in an interview on StarWars.com that the plan here seems to be that they will reveal how she survived in upcoming content, future content. I forget the exact wording, but they said content, not episodes of The Bad Batch. Now, that could mean episodes of The Bad Batch, but I'd be a little surprised with where we're going, and I think the focus that there needs to be on the clones, if we do randomly reintroduce Ventress and have her tell her backstory of how she survived death. I think you need a few too many plot threads to come together to allow that story to happen here. So my thoughts on that is that it's either happening in a comic, a novel, or my guess is Season 2 of Tales of the Jedi, which I think is meant to be out this year, but we don't know who the focus characters are for Season 2 of Tales of the Jedi. So I think, in a similar way to the way they kind of adapted some of the Ahsoka novel for Tales of the Jedi Season 1, I could very much see them adapting some of Dark Disciple, maybe all of Dark Disciple, and then expanding the end of it to explain Ventress's return, and have it be a thing where it's like a combination of Ventress and Quinlan Vos as the subject matter for that first kind of part of the season. And then I guess they'll have some other characters for the remaining episodes, depending on how they do it. But that's fine. So, because of how the book ended, which was that Ventress dies by basically being hit by Force Lightning by Dooku to save Quinlan Vos. So she has a kind of heroic death, basically. But she's then brought, her body is kind of laid to rest on Dathomir in the kind of Night Sisters waters, with the idea being that, like, well, they have a lot of resurrection stuff going on, so it's something related to that, but it does need to be explained, because it is a bit of a confusing situation, because it's basically like, for people who haven't read the book, and especially if you don't know that the character is dead from like the wiki or something like that, there's no confusion for you, but there is if you have actually read the book. And so they have to do this in some sort of a way. And in my mind, if you're going to resolve this in the way I think they probably have to, you probably do need to bring people up to speed on at least a portion of the story of Dark Disciple. So some adaptation, I think, is in order. So it feels like you kind of need to do some Clone Wars episodes here, effectively, just to tell this story, but we'll see what way they do it, obviously. Ventress is here. What do they actually do with her? So, of course, we immediately do get the reveal. What is M count? And she talks about how it relates to your blood. And then she finally says it. She says midichlorians, and it's like, finally, that's what it stands for. It's midichlorian count. Great. I'm glad they finally just said that, because it's been frustrating to see them just not mention it at all. Because you wonder, like, just because of the way some people act about midichlorians, that they've, like, this is the start of ruining Star Wars, midichlorians, you wonder, like, would they stay away from it? But no, it's important to Project Necromancer and so on, so they're going to bring it up. And they go through the details. They're like, it's in your blood. Everyone has midichlorians, but if you have more of them, you are more likely to be good at accessing the Force. And so this starts the idea of Ventress testing Omega to see if she is like Force sensitive, if she has a high M count. There is a little bit of a weirdness surrounding that, because we know from like Sabine from Ahsoka that it is not necessarily the case that a like low M count as such means that you can't use the Force. But there's an extra subtlety here of, it seems like clones can't use the Force. That's the whole thing of this, is that just trying to put midichlorians into clones hasn't worked up until Omega. And this is, again, millions of clones. Ventress points out that across millions of clones, she's never heard of a Force-sensitive clone. But we know from Yoda, from like the first episode of the Clone Wars, that all of the clones are kind of unique within the Force. So they are considered unique beings, even though they're based on the same person. But it seems like there's some sort of a limitation on their kind of midichlorian count, and it can only ever be minimal, and it seems like a clone would have an extremely difficult time trying to harness the Force. But now we're kind of bringing up the idea of, wait, Omega, we can put a significant M count into her, and is she Force sensitive? They don't really tell you the answer to it in this episode, because the tests are rather unclear, like balance some stuff on your head, run over here, do this thing, and come back. And then it feels like the last test of kind of trying to connect with animals and then like pacifying the animal is the main one that was actually like, you know, showing anything. But it really comes down to, what does Ventress say at the end of the episode? And that is, in front of Omega, she basically says, like, I think your M count's actually low, so it's probably unlikely that you are Force sensitive, basically. But then, when Omega runs off, and she talks to the rest of the Bad Batch members, she basically is like, I was lying. And the idea of, if this is the case and she wants training, she would have to separate herself from you. You would have to hand her over to someone to be trained in this. And it's the idea of like, it's a Ventress who understands what like this would do to the group, which is quite close, is it would break apart your group to do this, to you hand her over to some sort of a Jedi or something like that, and that would put a target on her back just by itself. Do you want that, or do you want to have, you know, try and stay low all of this time? And Ventress can see that, and that's the kind of point here. Is it does seem like Ventress is basically saying that I think she has the ability to use the Force potential that if she trains probably could be, you know, accessed. So there is a bit of a mystery still there of like, can Omega use the Force? Because I don't think the episode like just confirmed it either way, but they're kind of highlighting that potentially. And what does this mean? Because let's say Omega can use the Force, and maybe at some point over the coming episodes we do see her actually use the Force. That means that there's kind of two things about her. Is that, one, she can accept M count transfer, midichlorian transfers into her, and it doesn't diminish over time. That's what we learned in the opening episodes. But then two, that with those midichlorians, she can then be Force sensitive. And basically that feels like Omega solves all of the problems of Project Necromancer, what Palpatine is trying to do. That Palpatine wants clones of himself that have a very high midichlorian count that he can sort of transfer himself into when his actual body, you know, gets too old. And this is how he can basically be immortal. So obviously there is some steps that would still need to happen here. And that is, they need to figure out what is special fundamentally about Omega compared to other clones that allows the midichlorians to survive stay all of there in her body when it doesn't with other clones. And then take that, do it to a Palpatine clone so that Palpatine clones can accept the midichlorian count. And then is there any difference here between sort of Omega, I guess, is given a decent M count, but Palpatine would want a very high M count, and does that change things? Because the result of this, based on what we see in the sequel trilogy, is basically Snoke as like a very powerful Force sensitive kind of corrupted clone of Palpatine, who Palpatine explains that like, I am Snoke, like I basically control him from a distance. But then the solution in episode 9 is that like his body is kind of held together with like machines and stuff like that. It's so powerful that like it barely works. So it feels like the mission is accomplished like 75% of the way, but Omega seems to suggest the idea that it's all right here. So unless Omega, they can't take what's special about Omega and do it to anyone else, or the Empire never actually gets Omega and they have to start again, and that's why it's a bit messy. It's hard to say. We still need to figure out like you know, where does the Empire go from here with the plan? And then how does that relate to the whole Grogu blood kind of coming into play in like kind of Mandalorian era and what's going on there? And it gets into like more complexities about this in terms of, yeah, like what is special about Omega? She obviously is still a clone of Jango, but she's an unaltered one outside of the fact that she's a girl. And like what does that kind of mean or imply? That why can she accept the M count when other people can't? And then, you know, from there, what exactly are we trying to do there? Because Omega's path feels very different if we have her go down the path of Force training. Whereas I think the show has made it clear it's about this kind of family, the Bad Batch staying together. So it feels like Omega wouldn't choose to pursue her training as such, and it is all about just everyone kind of sacrificing themselves to keep her safe. But we just don't really know. Like, is Omega going to get captured again at some point? Does the Empire, you know, get to experiment on her or not? And just how dramatic and intense are we actually doing things in the finale, basically, is the idea. Are characters going to die here? Who's going to come out of this in the end? Like, it feels like the sort of show where there's no way surely the entire Bad Batch is coming out of this with Omega and we're just happy. Something has to come into play here just because, you know, there's elements that need to come together here to set up like future content. So yeah, episode 9, yeah, Ventress kind of goes off with the idea being that I think she's given them all the advice that is required. I don't get the impression that like immediately like, oh, it's Ventress who needs to train Omega, but maybe that is part of the path. Like, a lot depends on, is there a greater path for Ventress? Because we're seeing more and more kind of Clone Wars characters survive into the following era more than we expected them to. So there needs to be new kind of layers of story for some of these characters. And so Ventress is a little bit of an open plot thread at this point in terms of like, where is her kind of end goal as a character now that she's kind of back alive again, basically. But just interesting stuff. So where do I think they're going in the remaining episodes? Obviously, the setup here is that the Empire is probably going to find them on Pabu. So I'm guessing there will be an attack here, forcing them away, ruining the potential peaceful situation that they have here. Does Omega get captured here? And is that the kind of setup of like, we need to find Omega again or what? Because obviously we have to have some sort of a showdown, basically, it feels like, on Tantis. But then it either has to be a big war between clones and stormtroopers on Tantis, or the same thing happening just somewhere else. I think we just need to wait and see what they do in the coming episodes to set up some of the more later episodes. But in general, good stuff with the Bad Batch Season 3 so far. They just need to deliver on the finale here. And I think remember that the show is not just about the Bad Batch, it is also clone focused. And that you need to, I think, have Rex, Wolf, Gregor, maybe even reintroduce Cody and stuff like that. You need to have these characters also have kind of big moments coming up as well. And I hope they do that and have this be this kind of other finale to the Clone Wars, just the more clone-focused finale of this. I think they can do it. There's enough episodes left to deliver on some important stuff. I just hope they have the answers and the reveals that are required here. So in the comments, let me know what your thoughts are on the Clone Wars Season 3 so far. But otherwise, yes, I'll be reviewing the coming episodes weekly, and hopefully it'll be a much easier time trying to talk about 2 or 1 episode per week rather than 9 all at once. But let me know your thoughts below. But that has been the video. Thanks for watching, and bye.